Let's talk about our last animation principle for this week. This one is most often the favorite of animators because it is a ton of fun to use. It's called squash and stretch. Now, this principle applies to pretty much any animated object. It's basically the squashing and stretching of an object. Even just while speaking, there's squash and stretch happening in my face. My jaw is moving, so I'm stretching my face as I'm speaking and squashing it as I close my mouth. The same thing is happening internally with my lips as I talk. Objects will squash as they impact with something, let's say a ball hitting a wall, and objects will stretch as they are flung out. You can see it in this animation right here where I believe it's Moana is talking. With her mouth movements, there is a stretch with her face and her jaw, and when she closes her mouth, everything squashes together. So, similarly to ease in and ease out, there are examples of squash and stretch all around you. Here is an example of real world squashing that happens when a ball is hit very quickly. It makes impact and it squashes, it squeezes down right here as well. You can see that that squashing happens from the speed and the impact of the object. So this is a real world example. You can see here as well as an example where we have a ball just moving up and down in a very mechanical way. It just pops up, comes back down. But having the ball begin its jump by first squashing it and then as it speeds through the air, stretching it, it gives it more life. By applying some elasticity to our objects in motion and using squashing and stretching, we get more natural and vibrant animations. Another good example is in this scene from Tangled that uses really exaggerated squash and stretch. If I push play, you can see it right here. He's moving through the air. He impacts with this object. And there's a little bit of a stretching going on with his arms and his head and his legs. Now, it's very exaggerated because this is the cartoon. But here he comes. He impacts with the object. We get that long stretch. And then when he comes back, there's a little bit of squashing as well. So that's an example of it used exaggerated in cartoons, but it's a really, really useful way of seeing how it can bring life to in animation. Let's jump back into Maya really quickly so we can see how this works. If we take a look at this ball here, it's been rigged, and we have some controls that allow us to squash and stretch our ball. If we want to, we could animate this rig so that the ball bounces into the air, stretching as it's speeding through the air, and then comes back down, squashing in from impact. You could see how we can visualize this. This ball actually moves very similarly to a cartoon called VeggieTales, which you all may be too young to remember, but it was about these veggies that could talk and sing, and it was really adorable because they'd recite Bible verses and teach kids about important morals and all that good stuff. But they moved very exaggerated, in very exaggerated ways, squashing and stretching like this. Now, I have an incredibly important point that I need to make about squash and stretch you must remember. If you don't remember anything else from this, that's okay, but I need you to remember this. The volume of your object cannot change when it's squashed or stretched. So, when it's stretching up, you cannot change the actual volume of your object. If it's stretching this way and growing this way, it needs to shrink this way. Now, that rule of you can't lose volume, you can't change the volume of an object can be broken, of course, but to be physically accurate, the volume is not allowed to change at all. And I can demonstrate that with a teeny project that I'll have you do for squash and stretch. All right, so let's make a small project and check out that principle of squash and stretch. So let's bring down a sphere. I'm going to move it up, set it to 1 on translate Y. Now, let's say we want this ball to bounce up and come back down. So I'm going to go to frame 10. I'm going to make sure the sphere is selected and let's key all of the attributes because we're going to have it move and we're going to have it scale with the squash and the stretch. So I'm going to hit S on my keyboard. Now let's move to, let's say, frame 30. And let's bring this sphere up. Let's hit S to key all of the attributes as well. And let's move to frame 50. And let's bring our sphere back down. Let's set it to 1 on translate Y. Let's hit S to key all of those attributes as well. Now we don't need to have 250 frames visible, so let's scale this down to about, let's say, 60 frames. All right, so now we have a very simple animation. If we push play, we have a ball that goes up, goes back down, and it's very mechanical. So let's add some squash and stretch to this. Now, as it pops up, there's going to be a little bit of squashing that happens and some stretching as it reaches this peak of its jump. So, on frame 10, let's scale it down just a bit, but remember that volume is important. You can't change the volume. So if it presses down this way, it needs to expand out a little bit this way. So I'm going to have it scale it down on the Y, and we're going to pull it out a bit on the X. And that's just to maintain the volume because we can't lose volume or gain volume. We just have to redistribute volume. So now we made some changes. We have it on the scale right here, still needs to be scale X and scale Y needs to still be keyed. So let's hit Shift R to scale those attributes. I'm sorry, key those attributes. Now, as it's coming through the air, it should be stretching before it hits the peak. So let's go somewhere in between. Maybe right around here on frame 22. And let's scale it this way. And because the volume can't change, we're going to scale it this way, but we need to scale it down this way just to redistribute the volume. Let's hit S to key that. And let's see what we got here so far. So now it's starting out a little squashed. It rises, stretches through the air, comes to a peak on frame 30. And now we should have it squash or stretch as it's coming back down, and we should have it squash as it impacts with the ground. So let's go somewhere in between frame 30 and frame 50. Let's say frame 38. Let's stretch this. Make sure that we don't gain volume or lose volume, and let's hit S to key all of that. Now, as it comes back down on frame 50, we should have a little bit of squashing. So I'm going to push this down. Let's distribute the volume and let's bring it back down so it's touching the ground. Let's hit S to key that. Now, we should have a ball bouncing that has some squash, stretch, and the same coming back down. So let's check this out. All right, so it's a little rough. It definitely needs help. It's still a little mechanical, but now you can see how adding a little bit of squash and stretch to our ball has made the movement of it a little more lifelike. So You're allowed to mess around with it as much as you want. If you want to add more keyframes in between to maybe control the stretch and the squash in the impact a little bit better and make it look a little less mechanical, you are absolutely free to do so. Once you're done, just remember to go up to File, Save Scene As, and name it Squash and Stretch. All right, so you just learned about the principle of squash and stretch, and you just made a little project with it. Now, all of these principles that we just learned will be included in our project for next week when we animate the bouncing ball. So it was really good that you stayed very simple with this week, that we just learned some of the very basics because everything is going to be applied next week. So save your project folder, make sure you have all your different scenes with their little animations inside, and I will see you again next week.